Welcome to Trash Talk, a podcast by Zero Waste Canada. I'm your host, Alistair McCallum. I moved to Canada in 2017 from England, and I've since held a variety of roles in the waste industry, and currently sit on the Zero Waste Canada board. On this podcast, we will dive deep into the world of zero waste and the circular economy, speaking with change makers who are helping to lead us to a more waste-free, sustainable planet. On today's Trash Talk, I talk with Kayli Smith, CEO and co-founder of Friendlier, a reuse company based in Guelph, Ontario. All right, Kayli, welcome. This is Trash Talk number 5. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, so let's start with the history of Friendlier, kind of your background, and then what led you to kind of create the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Kayli Smith. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Friendlier. And what we do is help businesses move away from single-use packaging waste by implementing reusable packaging solutions. And so we started the company, my co-founder Jackie and I, right out of university. We'd both been studying chemical engineering at the University of Waterloo. And so we'd both been doing a lot of work actually in manufacturing and supply chain and seeing how things were made, the sheer volume of what we were making and all the waste that goes along with it. And so that really sparked our interest in sustainability. We knew we wanted to do something to help eliminate some of that waste that we saw, but we weren't quite sure what. And then in our third year, we traveled to Sweden and we lived there for 4 months and did a study term. And so we got to travel around Europe and see a lot of different, systems and ways of doing things in Sweden. They're much more sustainable in general. So they think about how to limit waste within the supply chain as, part of the design phase as opposed to an afterthought, which we felt we sometimes saw in North America. And we got really inspired thinking about how we could bring some of those sustainable circular concepts and ideas that we saw in Europe back to North America, knowing that our consumers and our businesses are very different. We're a lot more fast-paced in North America, a lot more convenience-driven. And so thinking about how we could make the concepts that were more sustainable work, but for, all the things that we as North American consumers value. And that's when we started to form the idea behind Friendlier. We wanted to focus on food packaging to start because it was a pain point for us in our lives. We noticed it when we were traveling a ton. You're at the airport, there's so much waste. And even just going to school in Waterloo, we saw tons of food packaging waste litter and in our everyday lives. And so that was where we decided to start. We graduated in 2020. So it was April 2020. And that was, of course, the very beginning of COVID. So we were starting out during the pandemic that formed some of our early solutions. We started building a solution around takeout packaging, which was super prevalent during COVID times, especially, and went from there. And we've grown and evolved the company since then, but really just started immediately after university, trying to see if we could make an impact and get something going, and we were able to do that.
Awesome. Then going back, you mentioned you were in Sweden for a bit there. Was there one specific kind of moment or like day that you guys had like that eureka idea of like we gotta do something? Was there one kind of day out or like one vendor you went to get food that you were like, right, this is a problem we can fix?
Yeah, it was a lot of little moments, but we went to a Christmas market and we got mulled wine in, little reusable mugs that you could return to a different vendor. And we thought that's a really cool idea. At a rugby match in England, actually, Jackie saw they had reusable beer cups in place of single use. Everyone would line up after the match to get their £2 back. And so we thought, there's no way any North Americans are going to do that. But cool concept. And so that's where we started to think about where we could bring in technology and different components to be able to make it work for North America.
Awesome. And then you mentioned kind of starting in COVID times. So I guess like, so what was the initial like value your partners saw off the bat with this system?
Yeah, well, it was a learning process and an interesting time because we started targeting restaurants. And so they were going through a challenging time, of course, during COVID with all the shutdowns and then reopenings. And luckily, a lot of them were very aware of the amount of waste they were putting out because it was abnormal for them as well to have so much takeout and so much takeout packaging. And so we started in Guelph, where there's a strong kind of food service network of local businesses and restaurants that we were able to get involved with and kind of grow from there. But for those early customers, they saw it one at, many of them personally felt the problem and wanted to eliminate waste, but it was also a way to keep customers coming back and build some loyalty in because the nature of the system, customers can come back and return their packaging to the businesses or try, return it to another restaurant in our network. It created some loyalty within the system and kept customers coming back and ordering takeout again. So that was kind of a bonus benefit that we hadn't necessarily initially thought of, but came along with the system.
Right. And then just going back to kind of startup days, like so why was plastic chosen as the material of use? And then part two of that question is I believe you source your plastic locally in Guelph as well. So kind of like two parts. So why plastic? And then why was that kind of like huge value placed on sourcing locally?
Yeah, great question. So Jackie and I are both chemical engineers. So the first thing we did is a full analysis on different materials. And when you're looking at reuse versus other types of products, we're looking at the full life cycle analysis. So from material extraction to end of life and everything that happens in between, how much, you know, GHG emissions, they're the main focal point for us. But there's other components too, like water use and things that we were looking at. And so for us, we wanted to make sure, obviously, we got all the main functionality requirements for our customers. We could meet them at a cost, price point that would be reasonable for them. But most importantly, we wanted a material that was not going to be, so heavy or so thick, or so intense to manufacture that it actually negated the environmental benefits that we were trying to achieve. And so with reuse, you want to look at how many times are you, actually reusing the product? How many times do you have to reuse it to break even? Because sometimes what can happen is if put too much material into one product, you don't actually ever hit that break even point, because it took so much to manufacture that product. And so these are all the things that we were considering. Polypropylene, which is the material that we use for our products today, was the best, the lowest bar to be able to hit that break even point from a reuse standpoint. And we knew it was going to take time to build habits amongst the general public. We wanted to make sure we weren't worse off for the environment while we were trying to help it. And so that was the material that we selected. But really what we focus on at Friendlier is the system. So this, the software for the deposit management and tracking of the products, and then the reverse logistics and sanitation. And so we work with different manufacturers to actually produce the products. And we're, adding more all the time. So it will continue to evolve based on what our customers need. But sourcing local is super important in that life cycle analysis, because if you're having to transport products from across the world, there's a lot of emissions associated with that. And so we're, of course, minimizing emissions with the reuse piece, but we also want to be cognizant of the manufacturing piece to, again, make sure we can break even and start driving down emissions as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
then, of course, we want something that is recyclable at the end of the day if it does end up, in the blue bin.
Yeah. No, great. Yeah. You mentioned at the start, your focus was on foodware initially. So what has changed in your kind of growth path, and what other areas are you kind of looking to get involved in, or other areas you kind of currently growing in? What is that looking like right now for you?
We initially started with restaurants and we're growing that business. And what we saw was that once things started to open again post-pandemic, we got a lot of interest from the higher education space, so university and college campuses, and corporate, office type cafeterias. And so those were two areas that we've really leaned into, as well as event venues. So these are kind of, the high volume sites where a lot of disposables are used typically within a fairly small environment. You can think of a campus as like a mini city. And so that's been really great for us because it helps us get density really quickly in a high volume location. And the businesses that are operating these sites, the colleges, the corporate offices, the businesses that are operating there, as well as the corporate food service partners that are oftentimes servicing these types of clients, they all are very driven to hit certain sustainability targets that they have within their organizations. Whereas, independent, smaller businesses oftentimes are, they're more focused on other things, or they don't have a whole, ESG strategy. And so it was easier for us to make big strides and knock out, bigger volumes of single-use packaging through those kind of corporate-y type accounts. And so that's what we've really been focusing on for the past 2 years, to be able to really scale up.
And what are some like key benefits you're seeing from campuses? So in terms of, the vendors on site not having to procure single use anymore, for example, that could be a cost saving. And then in terms of like waste to landfill, you're seeing kind of progress on those fronts, and anything else you could kind of reference that are some key benefits.
Absolutely. So there's a large range of what people pay for single-use packaging. So it really depends on what they were using, but many of our customers do save money directly on the packaging costs, which is awesome. And we've continued to see the cost of single-use packaging increase because, they're really reliant on international supply chains. There's lots that can go on there, and virgin materials. And so
Yeah.
as the costs, go up and down or fluctuate there, they're really affected. We have a constant stream of local materials coming back to us through the system, and so it helps us to maintain a steady price point and really keep those costs as low as possible. And then they also save waste or save money, of course, on the waste piece because they aren't generating as much waste as they typically do. Private businesses usually have to pay for that waste removal themselves. So that's a big win as well. And then for their clients that they're serving, their customers, the users, the students, the employees, the customers of these sites, they're getting an elevated experience because they're getting a sustainable product that still has all of the benefits of, a durable, high quality package. And we're able to deliver that at a lower cost because we're reusing them over and over. So, yeah, many different benefits, some, that we didn't even think of initially, and they're coming out now, which is really, really cool to see. But we've seen, a lot of our new business comes from referrals from existing customers. So definitely
Great.
lots of benefits there.
Yeah, awesome. So one barrier, I guess, for reuse sometimes is how easy single use is in comparison. Wondering if you could like walk through a typical like pathway of using your products, and how it kind of compares, and what maybe you'd like looking to change maybe as well in terms of the process and make it even easier maybe going forward.
Yeah, so our goal is to make reuse as easy as single use.
Yeah.
And that's always been our mission. So for businesses, they can order friendlier packaging the same way they order single use, by the case. And that's really intentional to remain consistent with their experience previously ordering single use packaging. And we really take care of all the heavy lifting. We pick up the empties, they disappear and they get clean boxes of product dropped off. We take care of all of the, sanitation of the products to make sure that they're basically getting, a good as new product without having to do the work and figure out how to manage the inventory and everything that goes into that. And then for consumers, it's as, they don't have to know about us even when they get the package. Each item is typically sold with a deposit associated, so 50 cents. And then there's collection bins around the sites. So if you're a student at a university campus, you can just drop it in the bin. You scan the QR code that's on the package with your phone to claim the deposit, and that's it. So you get, 50 cents back on each one. So it's fairly straightforward, and that's really been our focus is simplify as much as possible because we're not going to create big change if it's not super convenient.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And then do you find there's good uptake in terms of like bringing containers back? Do you like tend to lose many, or is it kind of a very streamlined process you mentioned there? Is it very kind of clear, on the campus, you get your food in the container and then there's like very clear locations to return?
Yeah, so we get most like majority back. We get about our average return rate right now is about 70%. And what we see is typically when we're surveying for what happened to the ones that didn't come back, it's people are using them at home. So
Mm,
they're still getting reused. And so we often like to look at waste diversion as the kind of metric of success. How much waste are we diverting from
yeah.
campus or these sites? Because that's ultimately the mission and what we're going after. But we see some clients and some sites that are doing closer to 100. So it really depends on the site and the people, and how much, how into it they are, but also how long it's been going on because people might keep the first one or two to have at home, but then once they've got those, they're returning regularly. So sometimes it's just getting over that initial hump.
Yeah, great. Yeah. You mentioned, yeah, kind of growth on the campus. So wondering, so what's the next step in your scaling up journey? So what's next for your kind of growth goals? And then in terms of reuse generally, how can it be scaled up from what it is? It's grown loads in the last, yeah, kind of 4 or 5 years that I've seen. So what's the next step to go even further and see it kind of more mainstream?
Great question. So we're really focused right now on, as you say, scaling up and being able to prove that it's possible because that's sometimes one of the hesitations of the larger brands or chains is that it's not feasible everywhere. And what we've seen typically is very specific geographies, citywide systems that, for a brand that has locations all over, it's not really feasible for them to participate and only have certain sites using different types of packaging. And so we've expanded to support most of Ontario, Quebec, BC, Alberta's just coming online. So really focusing on getting that kind of geographic scale to be able to support across the board and support those national clients. And then we've also been getting into some different sectors. So we are actually working with Farm Boy. We've just expanded. We started with one site and have just added 5 more. And so grocery is a really great space for this because it exposes people to it, and people go back regularly. So it helps drive those habits. And, it's just like a reusable bag, except imagine if every time you forgot and had to buy another one, you could just return it and drop it off next time and get your money back. That's like what
Mm,
we're doing, but
yeah,
for packaging. And so very similar concept.
great. And what do you think is required next from a policy standpoint? So there's been single-use bans kind of coming in different like provinces, like BC's more strict, for example, other provinces. So what do you think is the next step to help you in your kind of growth path? And what do you want to see more from government to aid that?
We've seen some really great examples in Europe and other places of the world where policies have been helpful. For reuse specifically, things that are really kind of low-hanging items would be in-house dining. So we've seen mandates that anything in that's being consumed in-house, you're sitting in the restaurant, that has to be in reusable wares. So that's like a really, really easy one to be able to push for because it's not as complex as it's taking products away. You're literally sitting there, and you could drop it in a bin after. And so that's a really great example that has a really big impact, but it's not super complex to actually implement.
Yeah.
And then, the single-use bans are really helpful. Getting clear on labels and um, you know, kind of cracking down on the greenwashing that happens. We see a lot where people think, you know, we see businesses that are spending a ton of money on biodegradable labeled products, and it turns out, none of the composting sites in the area can actually handle it or break it down, or if it ends up in the recycling stream, it ruins the whole stream. And
Mm,
so there's products out there right now that are being marketed a certain way, and it's confusing for the businesses. It creates a lot of mistrust just in sustainable products in general, and it points them in the wrong direction. And so, everything that helps kind of cut down on that and provide clear instructions on best practices and incentives, that's even better to move to the really, I mean, the truly sustainable solutions is always helpful.
yeah, sounds like Canada can yeah take stuff from over the seas and kind of yeah bring it back and kind of yeah look at what's happening elsewhere well and then kind of yeah mirror that in terms of policies here too then yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even municipalities have a big opportunity. We've seen with EPR in the US, for example, the extended producer responsibilities legislation that's coming into specific states. It's basically passing the cost of, disposal for items back onto the producers.
Mm,
And at first, the producers were all fighting it super hard, of course. But then once, five states have developed all their own policies, now the brands are pushing for national frameworks
right.
because they don't want to have to deal with a different framework in every single jurisdiction. And so I think the same thing can be true if, five different cities, major cities in Canada, are mandating some sort of reuse legislation. At some point, there's a tipping point where the brands go, you know what, can we just make a national framework? That's going to be easier for us. And then, you've created a really big impact just through, some smaller municipalities. So I think even in those, kind of more local levels of government, there can be a big impact.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think we saw like a thing with the cup fee in Vancouver there where it was kind of brought in, there was pushback, but then like brands were kind of getting on board with it, but then politics got in the way and undid some of the good work being done. So yeah, it'd be good to kind of see yeah more streamlined approach nationally with the same rules to help yeah producers, help the brands, and yeah make it more of a group effort, let's say, in terms of advancing policy. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you, Katie. Yeah, so in terms of your closing message, what would your kind of call to action be on anyone listening who isn't sure about reuse, who maybe like has single use, ingrained in them? So what would your kind of call to action be on someone like not sure who goes into a restaurant maybe and sees friendlier products? What would your kind of um, yeah calling be to them?
Yeah, I would say reuse, of course, is, the most sustainable option in many cases, but it also creates local supply chains. and an elevated, higher quality experience. So there's a lot to be gained. I would encourage people to be open to it, try it. It's not a new concept. We're actually going back, to older concepts that we saw, like the Milkman, for example, or the very successful, bottle return program that we've had in Ontario and different areas of Canada for beer, for example, beer bottles. So these aren't new concepts. It's just different applications, and there's a lot of great benefits. So encourage people to try it out, talk about it to the brands. That's who, they really do listen to their consumers. We hear often, packaging is, businesses' number one complaints from their consumers, too much packaging. Or businesses where customers have seen us at one place and they go tell their other favorite businesses to take a look, and it really does make an impact and help businesses like ours scale. So keep talking about it and encourage the businesses that you're spending money with to implement reuse solutions.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Kay, for your time today. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your Friendlier grow and hopefully scale up quickly. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much.